Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Public Speaking, and this is Module 2. Now you'll notice that I've got the three major bullet points up here on our board, but I've also got some extensive notes here that I need to refer to because I want to make sure that I give you all the information that you need to do a really great job in public speaking. So sometimes I'll be glancing down at these notes, but I wanted to make sure that you knew that generally we use these podium aside and stand free and clear to the room as much as possible. But because I want to make sure I get this information accurate to you, I'll be referring to this just a little bit. So don't criticize me for glancing down occasionally. This is a lot like you having your 3x5 card here and looking down at it occasionally. I'll never criticize you for that. I'm glad you're taking this course and glad you decided to continue with your studies on public speaking. You know, it's very important for all of us to be a good public speaker. Every job listing that you see always says they want good communication skills. That's why this class is important. That's why this talent and this technique and this art, the art of rhetoric, as it's known, is good for you as a person, a leader, community organizer, whatever it is you decide to do with your life and with your talents, that's important. So today we're going to talk about listening, the audience, and how to adapt to the audience as speakers. And there's some psychology in this. Always remember that we're referring back to a book called The Concise Public Speaking Handbook. That's by BB and BB. Now in this first part of our presentation, our objectives include listing and describing 5 barriers to good listening. Listening is as essential as being a good public speaker. Identify then and implement strategies for becoming a better listener. Identify and implement strategies for improving critical listening and critical thinking skills. And then finally, use good criteria to effectively and appropriately evaluate speeches. Now, you won't be evaluating the speeches in class. I'll be doing that. But because all of us are working together, you'll want to evaluate the speeches of those people around you. Whenever I go and hear anybody speak, I always take notes. Even if I toss the notes away after we're done, that way we're able to follow along and keep that in memory a lot longer, especially if it's something I really like. Now, first of all, how to overcome these barriers to effective listening. Number 1, listen and select the kind of information you want to keep. You don't have to remember everything, but select those important parts of the presentation that are essential to you. And then attend. Now that doesn't mean being there. You're already there for the public speech or whatever's going on. But this word attend means to pay attention to the presentation. If you have to, lean forward a little bit. If you must, take notes, as I always do. Please don't let anybody distract you. Don't play on that forever present cell phone. That's a killer. If you don't pay attention, you'll never remember what's being said, and you'll get a lot of information mixed up. Then, once you select and attend to the certain kind of information being presented, try to understand it. That's a beautiful word if you think about it. What's under where you're standing? What is it that you've learned about the presentation, the evidences, the materials, all the information that's been presented? Then, try to remember the essential parts. For example, I can look here and say we're talking about listening, audience, and adaptation. I remember those points. I don't have to look back at them, and I don't have them in the notes. And then finally it says respond. It's important for you to respond to every speaker. If you don't agree with them, you can do like this non-verbally. I don't agree with that. You can shake your head in a nod. And if you go to church, you know, they love for you to shout amen or glory hallelujah. Well, whatever it is that you can do to respond is important. Please be civil, always be dignified, and don't be hostile. That never pays off, and it just ratchets up the emotion. Now, sometimes, if you're not careful, as a public speaker or as a person living in this world today, you get what's known as information overload. Now, that means that sometimes a speaker, and I hope it's not you, will try to give you so much information that they actually bombard you with too much, and you can't remember it. You can't tell everybody everything you know in one sitting, or standing, or speech. Don't do that. focus in on some essentials like what we've done today and focus in on those. I could have tried to present 6 chapters of this book today, but that wouldn't make sense to you or me. It's important for us to bite off what we can chew. My dad used to say, don't bite off more than you can chew. So working through this, we think about people have personal concerns, outside distractions, prejudices, and differences in speech rate and thought rate. Now let's pause there for a minute. That's pretty important. I speak publicly, but slower than you're thinking. So especially in this kind of medium, video, you could be out into the bathroom and not even listening to me right now. You're not, are you? Oh, okay. I think it's important for us to remember then that your audience is thinking maybe 3 times faster than you're speaking. So you're speaking, they're thinking around the information that you gave them, and so sometimes they'll go down a rabbit hole and disappear. It's important for us to remember that we've got to try to keep bringing the attention back to our presentation. Listen with your eyes as well as your ears. The old misnomer about, well, I'm listening to you although I'm not watching, is generally not true. We generally listen to and attend to what we're watching. And so if your son or daughter, if you have children, if they say to you, well, I'm still listening to you, they're not. They can pretend that they are, but they're not. Get people to look at you. That's why it's important for us to draw attention. That's why we use these gestures. That's why we use facial expressions. That's why we do all of this, to get people to pay attention to what we're doing. Monitor the emotional reaction around the room as you're speaking. Don't look in the corners like we've already told you. Don't look all around or over their heads. Look right at people, look in their faces, watch their eyes, and a lot of that will tell you what they're thinking. Be a selfish listener. As you listen, make sure you pay attention to the person speaking and try to grab everything they can say. And if somebody tries to distract you, tell them politely, we'll talk about that, but I want to hear this right now. It doesn't make them mad, it sort of makes them respect you. As you listen for major ideas, essential parts, and practice listening. Listen to friends, family, in conversation. Practice being a good listener. It will especially save your job. And if you're ever in politics, this is a big deal. Observing, listening. Now, if you think about understanding listening styles, this is important. There's relational-oriented listening. That means where you're sitting and how this relates to you. Task-oriented, people ticking off things. You've got to do something, and so you listen to the steps you're supposed to accomplish. This is done at work a lot. Analytical listening, which is you're analyzing an idea or a philosophy or something somebody's promoting and trying to decide if it fits together and makes sense. And critical listening means you want to see if you think there are flaws there. This isn't bad. This is good to do. It doesn't mean that you're critical of everything. Like, our political structure right now, as you're watching this video, is terrible because people just decide they hate you, and then no matter what you promote or what idea you have, you're destined to doom. That's not good critical listening. Being critical means you hear something that you like, regardless as to the source, it may make sense for you. Become an active listener. A lot of people think that listening's passive, but it's not. It's active. Lean forward. Get your energies up. Take notes. Listen to the ideas. Let them construct your philosophy or your interpretation of what's going on. And if you can, rephrase what's being said. Put it in your own words, in other words. And if you ask a question, rephrase it just enough to see if you've got the right understanding. And repeat it. Repeat it out loud to them. So what you're saying is, I do this with my students all the time. Dr. Lucas, I can't take the test on Wednesday night. So what you're saying is you're going to miss class. That's what they're saying, but they're saying they can't take the test. And so I repeat it back to them to see if I've got it. And listen ethically. Don't pretend to listen to people and stare off at the sunset. Communicate your expectations and watch for feedback and let them do the same as speakers. Be sensitive and tolerate differences. Too much today. We've got people who never listen to what you say. They just wait for you to finish so they can start talking again. And I'll tell you something that really bothers me, and I hear it on just almost every channel now. I love to watch the news, and I like political news. But I can't stand it when they get 3 or 4 people on the screen and everybody's just yapping and talking and just going crazy, and as they say in speech, stepping on each other, where they're talking over another person. It just drives me nuts. So I think it's important for you to learn to be a good listener and to listen ethically and to tolerate differences. Even if you don't agree with them, wait for them to finish, listen to everything they said, pick out the points, and then say, here's why I don't agree with you. I think that's important. Be sure to separate facts from inferences. I want to stop in this word inference because it's often misused. Inference is something I do. It's something you do. I might have on a tie that has a certain symbol on it. There are a lot of these highbrow colleges that have their own tie. Oxford, Harvard, Cambridge, a lot of them have different ties. If you wear that tie, that person might infer. Inside their brain, they might think that because you have on that tie, you go to Cambridge or you went to Cambridge. That's inferring. So the other person, I can't infer to you, you infer from what I say. So be very careful to separate facts that people have stated from your inferences that you've made about them. I might have on a Harvard tie, and I do wear one occasionally because I taught a seminar there once. I didn't attend Harvard. I wish I could have, but I was from Southern Indiana, didn't have any money, and certainly was not a highbrow student at that time. Evaluate the quality of the evidence. Find out if it's an example, an opinion, or a statistic. Be careful. Don't just buy into something because so-and-so said it was that way. That may or may not make it true. Learn to listen critically and think about what they're saying. Is it an example, their opinion, or is it based on a statistic? Analyze and evaluate all the speeches that you think about. And always give feedback. I like it when my students give me feedback. Be descriptive in what you're saying. Dr. Lucas, I watched your video and I really liked the way you talked about listening, or whatever. Be descriptive. Be specific. If you have an objection or if you can't get a quiz, you can't just write and say, hey, Dr. Lucas, I can't get into one of the quizzes. Well, I'm on the other end of that email. I have no idea which quiz it is. Be constructive and always be positive. Don't be negative to people. Don't say, Dr. Lucas, you're the ugliest guy I ever met. Be positive and try to be sensitive to people's needs and where they are, and always be realistic. And give feedback to yourself. A lot of times people don't do this, and I think it's very important for you to do this. Give feedback to yourself. What does that mean? Look for and reinforce your skills in listening and watch the way people speak. And if you see a gesture or a movement or something that you really like, and I do this all the time, reinforce that to yourself and learn that skill or talent. Evaluate your own effectiveness as a listener and think about, use the person that's speaking as a pattern. Say, I do that well, I may do that a little better. Don't tell them that. I am not as good as that person, and so forth. But be realistic. Don't be hard on yourself. And finally, always identify areas which you can improve. So we've talked about how to become good listeners. I teach an entire class just on listening. So this is a brief overview, but we can do a lot more. But we don't have the time here in public speaking to do that. Next, we want to talk about how to analyze your audience. It does you no good to speak if the audience is listening. And how, big question is, are you going to get the audience to listen? Here's how that's done. In this particular part of the module, we're going to talk about describing informal and formal methods of gathering information about your audience. Getting to know them. Getting to know your audience, even if it's a one-time audience. We're going to explain how to analyze and use information to adapt to the audience. That's what I said. Adapt to the audience. If you're a flaming Republican and you're speaking at a Democratic conference, you're going to have to adapt some things so they don't tar and feather you and throw you out. And this does happen. Sometimes people are invited to go to conferences and to different speech events where you're the total opposite of the people that are there. Well, don't go in there brandishing weapons. Go in there and adapt to that audience. I didn't say to give up any of your principles. I didn't advise you to sacrifice any kind of beliefs you had. It's just better if you can get your audience at least to listen to you. And then understand the demographics of what's going on. And by that I mean, what's the shape of this audience? Who are they? How old are they? And so forth. We're going to discuss attitudes that can affect audiences, understand the key aspects of a speaking situation, and finally figure out ways that we can get the audience to buy into your speech. So pay attention to this as you read it in the book, and pay attention as we talk about this in the module. You can gather information informally with the audience standing around before they begin. Hi, I'm Dave Lucas. I'm going to be speaking tonight. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. Where are you from? What do you do for a living, etc. Or you can gather it formally. You can actually have open-ended questions and closed-ended questions. You can even send a sort of survey before you get there in some instances. If I've got an audience at a customer I often do customer satisfaction seminars where I talk to bankers, for example, people that work in a bank, and how to satisfy their customers. I often send a little survey and a questionnaire to know who I'm talking to before I get there. I'll send these out about a month before. They fill them out, they send them back in, and now I do all this on the computer, and they give them the link, and these people go on there and they answer these questions. They're not intrusive. I'm just trying to get a feel for who these people are. And if you do that, you can get SurveyMonkey or a host of other survey services and send them a link and have them fill it out. It's pretty interesting. So you can do that and find out about the audience. So here's what you want to ask and what you want to look for. Similarities in the audience and to you, differences within the audience and with you, and common ground. And this is the secret, no matter what the audience. Seeking common ground. If you're a Republican going to a Democratic conference, a Democrat going to a Republican conference, a Christian going to an atheist conference, an atheist going to a Christian conference, all of this can happen, but you've got to try to find, as a speaker, common ground. Now you can go in, go hog wild, go crazy, have people protest, burn the building down, and what do you gain? Seriously. Maybe your spot on TV as being a rabble rouser. Okay, if that's your intent, that's on you, not on me. But for me, I want to make headway with people. I want to gain ground. I want to figure stuff out. I want to make progress. And in my life, that means trying to figure out what makes you tick and how to present something that you'll follow. So we do adaptation that we're going to talk about here in just a moment. We adapt to the audience. We don't conform to the audience necessarily, but we do adapt our messages so that we can get through it without getting a brick thrown at us. Now, demographics are important. They're characteristics of the audience that are critical that you can make some summaries about. Age, gender and sexual orientation, cultural, ethnicity, and so forth. Now, let's talk a moment about ethnocentrism. You see, if I'm going to go speak to a bunch of Hispanics out in New Mexico, I can't go in there thinking that I'm better than they are. And that's what you have to watch. Some people suffer from that idea of ethnocentrism. There's no place better than West Virginia. It's almost heaven. Well, if that's true, then no other person lives in any other state close to heaven. We're better than they are. That's not necessarily true. Ohio, the heart of it all. Well, the rest of you are just limbs and hair and teeth and so forth. Well, that's not really true. We have these cliches and phrases to promote our region geographically. We put the United States always in the middle of the globe and the map so that we shine brightly. But there are other countries that are much larger, such as China, huge space, and Russia, huge space. So think about it and realize that even though it's wonderful to love America, and I do, and I'm an extreme patriot, I also never go into an audience believing that I'm better than they are. Think about what group members might be present, whether they are bowling or whether they are a KKK or whatever the group membership may be, and the socioeconomic status. Believe it or not, people in Appalachia think differently than people out on the West Coast. People in California think a little bit differently than people in Minnesota. People in Florida think a little bit differently than people in New York and New York City. So think about it. Now, there are three keys here we want to mention. Attitude, which is the likes and dislikes that the audience may share. Beliefs is what they hold to be true or false, what they hold dear, and their values, the enduring concepts of good and bad, holy and unrighteous, and so forth. So those three areas, attitude, belief, and value. We can change people's attitudes fairly quickly. It's a little more difficult to change beliefs, and it's nearly impossible to change somebody's value in one speech. It can be done, but you've got to be good. Analyze the attitudes toward your topic. Are they interested, uninterested? Are they favorable toward it or unfavorable? Are they a captive audience or they volunteered? I spoke at a prison once, and they were good attending. They listened. They didn't have anything else to do. They were forced to be there for my speech. Analyze attitudes that are resulting as a result of you, the speaker. Always think about time and place. Think about the audience size. The bigger, the more medium you have to reach out to them. Arbitrons, big televisions, PA system, and so on. Or this medium, which we're using, video, it may just be you in the room or you on your computer watching me right now. So you have to think about your audience and how they're receiving it and how you're getting to them. And the occasion. This is a teaching occasion, and so I have notes and I have things on the board. It's not a full-blown public speaking event where I'd be in the room with my audience. There are nonverbal responses. There are verbal responses. There are some survey responses you could take and that you have already looked at. And then when you get there, there are behavioral responses. There is no reason why that you can't figure out a little bit about your audience before you speak at that occasion. And now finally, before I let you go, and by the way, you can always go back and look at these again. That's the nice part about video. Now you may not want to see me, but you do want to think about the information we're presenting. And so if something didn't make sense, you didn't get the note down or see it in the book, you can go back and play this video again. Play it for your friends. Let other people comment on what they think about it, because that reinforces what you're learning. Here we're talking about adaptation and how we adapt to the audience. Now we've mentioned that already, but I want to go into a full-blown explanation now. First, how to read those non-verbal cues they're giving. And watch listener reaction. I'm going to describe several adaptation ways in which you can respond to listeners' nonverbal cues, and list several ways you can customize your message specifically to an audience. And then finally, some strategies to adapt to a diverse group. First of all, let's think and analyze the nonverbal cues. Eye contact. It's important for you to stay in eye contact with the people you're speaking to. Notice that when I speak, I'm looking right at you. I'm not looking over your shoulder or up at the corners of the room like they tell you to. You can't do that. Look right at your audience, square in the eyes. Watch their eyes, because sometimes they'll squint. They may even shake their head, no, I don't agree. Or sometimes they'll do this and they'll think, yes, I agree. And that gives you boldness and confidence in what you're doing. Facial expressions. The eyes and the face are the windows to the soul. They tell you, for the most part, what people are thinking. And nonverbal cues are more accurate and more truthful and more open and honest than verbal cues. Think about that for a minute. We can all believe those nonverbal cues more because it's hard for people to hide how they feel. Some people can do it, gamblers, con artists, but not all people can. Watch their movement and their posture. If somebody's got their arms folded and they're doing like this, they're probably not paying any attention to you at all. However, if they are listening, then it's good. They're going to be leaning forward a little bit, maybe taking notes. I tell everybody, if you go to church this Sunday, go take notes. The preacher will go wild. He'll think he's found new gold. It's important for you to think about that. And then finally, all of those responses that can be nonverbal. Ask this question as you watch them. Is my audience attentive, or do they seem bored? Encourage audience participation. Get them occasionally to raise their hand or shake their head or try to inject something that gets them to answer. If they're bored, simplify what you're doing and speed up, because there's no use you talking if they're not listening. If the audience is confused, they're going to show it, and you might need to backtrack a little bit and say, I can tell that you're a little confused, let me rephrase. Slow down, repeat the points, and start over. Always use a visual aid if possible. It's critical that you make sure the audience understands what you're talking about. And if the audience disagrees with you, just go back and rely on the facts and the evidence that you've researched to tell your story. Communicate to your audience that your message is customized. It's not a cookie cutter speech that you've done other places. I've done a lot of political dinners in my years. I'm very active politically. And so I go from dinner to dinner here and there. Now there are Democrat dinners and there are Republican dinners, and you probably know this, but if you don't know this, they always have some politician, generally somebody in the mainstream, to speak. Well, I watch these speakers go from these dinners and they always use in that season the same speech. It's not adapted at all. They use the same thing over and over again. I suppose because once they get on something that seems successful, they use it over and over again. But I'm thinking right now, and you can tell by my facial expressions, I'm amused, of one in particular that I could probably give now. I heard it 3 different times in one season of political dinners. It was pretty interesting. Always refer to the place you're speaking. Bring it home. That's why they do that in concerts. Good evening, Charleston, West Virginia. Or, hey, is this Huntington, West Virginia? They always refer to the place to get everybody all excited. Talk about something recent, the date, a recent event. It makes people believe that you've done your homework. And refer to any groups or organizations that are either sponsoring the speech presentation or that are attending. And finally, always supply evidence to the people in the audience. In other words, make sure your evidence fits the people that are there. You couldn't talk to senior citizens about some youth project unless they were the ones donating the money. Identify your target audience, whether it's individualistic or collective, whether they're high or low context. Look that up, that's very important. Toleration of uncertainty and the need for uncertainty, need for certainty. People want to know facts and they want to know what to do. Whether this is a high or low power moment, and whether it's long or short time orientation. All we've talked about is this idea of being audience centered. And throughout the rest of our presentations, all of our modules, we'll talk to you about being very active in being pointed to your audience. Make sure that you read through your textbook. I know it's a notebook, or they call it a booklet, and that's kind of what it is, a handbook. But it's very important because they've kind of cut all that down into some concise information that'll be helpful to you. It's good to go out on the internet and to do some other things. You might want to search out Dave Lucas because I've got a lot of material on YouTube and other places that might be of help to you. But most importantly, remember that public speaking makes everyone think you're smarter, everyone think you're taller, and everyone think you're the leader of leaders. So get this down, make it happen, and enjoy getting out there and giving public speeches. I'm Dr. Dave Lucas. This is Module 2. Make sure you complete your quizzes if you've got them there, and make sure you keep looking into all of this about public speaking. Thank you for listening.